The sun was sinking toward the horizon, casting long shadows through the forest. Luke often walked these paths after work. It helped him unwind. But something felt off this evening. The forest seemed frozen in place. The silence was unnatural, oppressive, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Luke felt his heartbeat quicken when he noticed a large figure between the trees ahead. It was a bear, but not like any bear he had ever seen before. The creature sat with its back to him, head lowered, as if lost in deep sorrow. Its silhouette carried a strange, almost human grief. The bear was crying. A chill ran down Luke's spine. He knew how dangerous bears could be, especially at dusk, but this one's behavior was different, disorienting. The bear didn't growl, didn't charge, didn't flee. Instead, it slowly lifted its head and looked straight at him. There was no anger in its eyes, only silent pleading. Luke felt a lump rise in his throat. His instincts screamed, "Run!" But his body refused to move. He stood frozen in place, trapped between fear and awe. The bear sobbed again. Luke tensed. Why is it crying? What's wrong with it? What had begun as an ordinary evening walk had turned into something extraordinary. The bear rose and, with a strange, almost careful grace, took a few steps closer. Luke didn't move, torn between terror and a pull he couldn't explain. Then something unexpected happened. The bear stopped just a few meters away, turned slightly to the side, as if inviting him to follow. It cast one last glance back and began to walk away, slowly, purposefully. Stunned, Luke remained still. What am I doing? This is madness, or a calling. Something unexplainable, almost magical, pulled him forward. He couldn't go back. When Luke took his first step behind the bear, the forest grew denser. Twilight thickened. The trees stretched long, eerie shadows across his path, shadows that seemed to move and breathe. This is madness, he thought again. But his legs kept moving, as if led by an invisible hand. That strange connection, born from a single glance and a tear, wouldn't let go. "Where are you taking me?" Luke whispered into the dark. The bear, silent and sure, kept walking. The deeper they moved into the forest, the more surreal it all felt. The path beneath Luke's feet became surprisingly smooth, almost as if the animal knew every bend and bump. And then, a barrier. Before them, a roaring river stretched from one bank to the other. The sound of rushing water drowned everything else, and the current looked terrifying. Luke stopped at the edge, staring at the torrent bathed in ghostly moonlight. The scene felt like a dream. The bear didn't hesitate. It approached a fragile, makeshift bridge of logs and began to cross. Luke watched in horror as the wooden planks bent and groaned beneath its weight, but the bridge held. On the other side, the bear turned and looked back, its gaze urging him to follow. "I can't," Luke thought, panic rising in his chest. But alongside the fear, a spark of determination stirred. This was the moment of truth. If he turned back now, he would never know what lay beyond that river, beyond that night, beyond that silent gaze. Clenching his jaw, Luke took a step. The bridge groaned ominously. Each movement was slow, each footstep uncertain. The boards creaked and slipped under him, but he kept going, slowly, but with resolve. A sudden gust of wind made the bridge sway, ominously, threateningly. Luke clutched the rope railing, his fingers whitening as he gripped tighter. On the other side, the bear stood motionless, watching him with a strange calmness, as if it somehow knew Luke would make it. His heart pounded violently. Every step was a struggle, but he kept going. And finally, solid ground beneath his feet, relief washed over him like a wave. The bear continued forward, step by step, with that same odd caution. The air was getting heavier, as if it was thick with something unseen. Luke could feel the tension, not fear, but expectation, a strange anticipation, as if he was nearing some kind of revelation. With every step, he sank deeper into mystery. The silent creature led him somewhere beyond the bounds of ordinary life, and then, through the trees, shapes began to emerge, structures, old, rusted. Luke quickened his pace. They stepped into a clearing, and what he saw took his breath away. Sorry for the brief interruption. Before we continue, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. It really helps us create more stories like this. Thank you. Now, back to the forest. In the center of the clearing, surrounded by ancient trees, stood an abandoned circus. Once bright tents were now faded, rust-covered, fluttering in the wind with a mournful creak. The metal frames were tangled in moss and decay. The air was thick with sadness and abandonment. Cages, giant, rusted, partly broken. Most of them empty. But in a few, animals still remained. Their fur hung in patches, their eyes dull and filled with suffering. Luke stood stunned. Deep in the forest, a circus. Forgotten, decaying, broken by time. He followed the bear slowly, stepping carefully through debris, shattered rides, scattered toys, splintered wood and twisted metal. It all felt like a graveyard of memories, of pain, of past lives, of lost dignity. The wind whistled through the rusted skeleton of the old Ferris wheel, producing a haunting, creaking melody. Each slow turn echoed like a groan from the past. Luke felt it, a deep connection between this place and the bear. Finally, the bear stopped by a large cage, empty. Luke came closer, the weight of this place pressing down on his chest. He crouched and looked into the bear's eyes, and in them he saw pain. Deep, old, alive. You were here before?" Luke asked, barely above a whisper. The bear gave the slightest nod, and everything fell into place. This had been his circus, his prison, his trauma. These walls remembered his fear, his loneliness, his tears. He had brought Luke here to show him, to tell him, without words, but louder than any scream. This wasn't just a bear. This was a soul that had survived hell. And now he had come back. Not for revenge, but for truth. Luke looked around at the empty cages, leaving the animals behind, forgotten, suffering, was unthinkable. He realized he had to act. Soon, he sent an urgent message to local authorities, a cry for help, for rescue. The bear had led him here for a reason. It was a sign. But Luke didn't yet know that with the arrival of help, even deeper secrets would begin to emerge, hidden under the rust and the silence of the years. As he continued to explore the remains of the circus, the atmosphere grew heavier with every step. Rusted metal, rotting canvas, the scattered remnants of toys, and the quiet suffering of the creatures, all whispered, "There was once evil here, and it never fully left." He approached a large tent, half collapsed, its torn fabric fluttering like a forgotten flag. And as Luke stepped inside, he felt it deep in his bones. He had entered the heart of the cursed circus. In the center of the tent stood a round arena, surrounded by rotting wooden seats, silent witnesses to once roaring applause and bursts of laughter. Luke froze. Through the stale air and the groan of the decaying beams, he could almost hear echoes of former glory, echoes now drowned out by grim silence and the shadow of oblivion. He slowly scanned the arena, trying to imagine how alive and loud this place had once been, filled with children's laughter, whistles, shouts of delight, and whips. And then he noticed them, deep grooves in the ground, crossing the arena in chaotic patterns. Marks of pain, marks of struggle, marks of how the animals were forced to obey. The bear, who had followed him all this way, stopped at the edge of the arena. Its eyes, once full of life, now reflected only sorrow. Luke stepped closer. "You were part of all this, weren't you?" he whispered. The bear didn't look away. It didn't growl, didn't beg. It simply looked at him. And in that gaze was more than words could ever hold. Its whole story. This bear wasn't just a creature of the forest. He was a former prisoner, a performer, a soul turned into a spectacle. His pain had been hidden behind the curtain of cheerful fanfare. Luke could feel compassion swell in his chest, sharp and almost physical. The silence now felt deafening. This was no ordinary place. It was a monument to cruelty. And at the same time, it was the stage of the bear's life, a place where, though physically freed, he remained shackled by memory. As he looked around, Luke noticed other cages. Some were empty, but in a few, animals still remained. Their gazes were vacant, stripped of hope. Time seemed to close in. Luke remembered the message he'd sent to the authorities, a cry for help that might never have reached them. He fumbled for his phone and stared at the screen, desperately searching for signal. Nothing. Empty. Panic tightened around his chest. These animals couldn't wait. They had suffered far too long. He turned back to the bear. The same silence remained in its eyes, and a kind of waiting. "I'll help you. I'll help all of you," Luke whispered, barely audibly. He rushed to one of the cages and tried to force it open, but it was tightly locked. His heart pounded, hands trembling. He couldn't do this alone. A rescue team was no longer a wish. It was a matter of life and death. And then, a sound. At first faint, then louder. Engines. Luke ran to the tent's entrance. Moments later, headlights pierced through the forest. Several vehicles stopped near the circus. From them emerged people in uniform, forest rangers, police, and an animal rescue team. The bear quietly followed behind Luke. "Are you Luke? Did you call us?" asked a woman, an environmental officer, calm and resolute. He nodded, taking a deep breath. "Yes, I found this bear. He led me here. There are still animals inside. They need help, now." The team didn't waste a second. Grabbing their tools, they rushed into the tent. Luke followed, without hesitation. He helped open the cages, one by one. What they found inside shook even the most hardened rescuers. Some animals were so emaciated they could barely stand. Others bore visible wounds, their eyes dull and lifeless. They hesitated, stepping out cautiously, as if they couldn't believe the cages were open, that this wasn't some trap. But the moment they felt real ground beneath their paws, not a blood-soaked arena, but living, breathing earth, a spark lit inside them. Slowly, tentatively, they began to walk. Each step was a step toward a new life. The bear stood aside and watched. Then he took a step back, and another. He didn't run. He didn't roar. He simply began to walk away, into the darkening woods, toward the freedom that awaited him. Luke watched him disappear into the trees, and in his heart there were no words, only a feeling. Thank you. Those who had spent the longest time in captivity seemed unable to believe in freedom. They stepped out of their cages uncertainly, glancing around in confusion. Some, especially the weakest and most exhausted, were gently carried out by rescuers. Nearby, by the tent, police officers were inspecting every corner of the circus, taking photos, documenting evidence of abuse. "It's much worse than we thought," one of them said quietly, looking away. Luke heard it, and his heart clenched. Those words were the truth. The abandoned circus was only the surface of a much darker reality. A world where suffering was hidden behind the mask of entertainment. When the last animals were loaded into the vans, toward warmth, care, and healing, the bear that had brought Luke here remained by his side. There was a new calmness in the bear's eyes, as if he understood. It was over. His mission, to show this place to the world, was complete. The vehicles drove off one by one, disappearing into the morning mist. Luke and the bear exchanged one final look. No words were spoken. None were needed. A silent understanding passed between them, filled with gratitude and deep knowing. Freedom had been reached. But the road to it had been hard. The bear was free now, but forever marked by his past. And so was Luke. That day had changed him. He could never go back to the life he had known, as if someone had torn away a blindfold and shown him the world as it truly was. Days passed, but the images of the abandoned circus wouldn't leave Luke's mind. He kept seeing the caged animals, the creaking boards of the bridge, the ghostly moonlight above the arena, and the bear's eyes. Soon, the story went public. Local and national media picked up the tale of the hidden circus. An investigation was launched. Journalists uncovered the truth. Illegal animal exploitation had gone on for years. Those responsible were found and arrested. The circus was permanently shut down, and the land was officially declared a protected forest zone. But for Luke, it wasn't the end. It was a beginning. He became a passionate advocate for animal rights, a role he had never imagined for himself. The bear's eyes, full of pain, full of strength, had changed him. He realized those who cannot speak need someone to speak for them, and that someone had to be him. Luke began sharing his story. He spoke at forums and schools, joined charity campaigns, filmed videos, all to spread one message. One encounter can change more than one life. The bear became a symbol. A photo of him stepping out of a rusted cage into the shadows of the forest went viral. It appeared in magazines, on social media, in exhibitions. It became a symbol of hope, resilience, and the fight against cruelty. Every time Luke saw that photo, two emotions filled his heart: pain, for everything the bear had endured, and gratitude, for the path the bear had shown him. Sometimes, Luke would return to that forest. He knew it was no longer the same. The forest had found its voice, through the bear, through him. And though he never saw the bear again, somewhere deep in his soul, Luke felt it. He was still there, free, alive, roaming between the trees, vanishing into the shadows, not as a prisoner, but as a guardian. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support inspires us to tell more stories like this one. May your life be filled with warmth, wisdom, and light, even on the darkest days. We wish you strength, health, and the courage to keep moving forward, no matter what.